This interview is to record Olbert Hiett Sr.'s Vietnam experience. He's no longer with us, so we will hear his Vietnam story through his son, Olbert Hiett Jr. And good morning. How are you doing today? First, what was your dad's full name?
It was Olbert Harold Hiett Sr. That's O-L-B-E-R-T H-A-R-R-E-L-L Hiett Sr.
Okay. Where and when was he born?
He was born April 29, 1926 in Marshall County, Alabama, more closer to Gunnersville, Alabama.
Mm. Now, what was your dad's full rank in the Vietnam War, and what part of the armed service did he serve in?
He was finished the service as a master sergeant, and he finished the service, of course, after 27 years in the Air Force.
Wow, that's quite a career, and he wasn't done yet with his career. There's still more to learn about him. You said he was in the Army during World War II and then went into the Air Force during Vietnam. Why did he decide to change branches?
He never really told me, but he enlisted in the Army, of course, as a young man, and he was discharged in 1946, in January, I believe, of 1946. He was in the infantry, and he was with the Black Hawk Division. And he joined it was called, rather than the Air Force, it was called the Air Corps. And that was on January 14, the day after, in 1946. He joined the Air Corps as a courier. And then in 1947, he went into the military police.
Wow. Now, I do remember learning as I started, before I started interviewing veterans, that was something that stood out to me, that they first called it the Air Corps before they turned it to the Air Force. And I think they did that with a lot of the branches. At first it was Corps, then it went to...
And that was in 1947. In 1947, the Air Corps became the United States Air Force.
Good piece of history right there. Now, when he transferred over to the Air Force from the Army, they had asked him to model some uniforms. Could you show us that picture of it and then tell us how that happened for him?
I believe this is a picture. This is a picture I found of my father. Can you see it all right, Kathy?
Hang on just a second. Let me see. Oh, yes, that's perfect. He's very handsome.
Yeah, he was a very handsome young man. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to show you one other picture. This is him when he's being awarded a trophy for the shooting for winning the pistol match with General LeMay.
Oh, wow. Hang on just one sec. I remember seeing this picture. Now, who was General LeMay?
Well, General LeMay was George Wallace's running mate when George Wallace ran for president.
Oh,
and
wow.
LeMay was his running mate in actuality.
You know what? I bet you during that time, especially the political end of it, sometimes they truly connected with the military people at that time. Well, you had to have a lot of conversations together, you know?
Well, you look at a lot of our past presidents, and they were all service related. A lot of them were.
Yes, absolutely. Do you know where he was when he found out about the Vietnam War starting? And what do you think he thought? Do you think he was surprised by the war starting?
No, I'll tell you the truth, Kathy. I think we were in Panama City, Florida, from 1960 to 1965, and of course Kennedy was president. And President Kennedy is the one who actually got us into the war. So we knew about it. He knew about it, but I don't remember him saying anything about it. And when we were transferred to Colorado Springs in 1966, my dad volunteered for service in Vietnam and got it. And that's when he went to Vietnam. And of course, this battle happened in December 1966. But It was during 1966 that my dad did request for service in Vietnam, and he was granted that, and he went to Vietnam. And I think a lot of it, the reason he went was his training. I think they desperately needed people like my dad who were masters of a lot of weapons, and they needed to train these men, especially, Dad was an Army associated, he was Air Force, and a lot of these Air Force bases had men that were protecting the bases, and they needed training in a lot of the weapons. And, I know you'd mentioned, where did my dad get his training? Well, I have with me a lot of cards saying that my dad was a master combat pistol master, and they're all from the National Rifle Association, who hosted a lot of, or just most of all of the pistol matches and things like that. And my dad was pretty much a master of all these things. And here's a card that says marksmanship instructor, rating held CPI 1. I don't know what that means, but so he was an instructor, and he got all of these cards that say he was a master pistol shooter. And I can show you these. I will bring these to you. I found them.
Oh, awesome.
I can bring these. You won't be able to get picked, but I have a whole slew of them here.
That's so awesome.
So, as I had mentioned, he was a master pistol shooter. And as we get down on the questions here, I have a lot of things that he trained the men on.
Oh, nice.
Grenade launchers, M16 grenades, M79 grenade launchers, everything. He was a master of all those things.
That's so cool. And yes, as we get going further, that'll be so exciting to be able to see all the different things that you have to be able to share of how the training was for the soldiers. Now, this was a question I wasn't sure, and there's a couple of them that are connected to this question. Since he had already been in the war and had training, as we were just talking about, did he have to go back through basic training?
No. In the service, when you go through you basically go through only one time. And even, I guess, when these men had transferred over, maybe into another service, they'd already had basic training. I mean, he had infantry training when he was inducted into the Army as a young man. He went through that.
Let's see. In his weapons, I guess as he was going along, he would have to requalify some for weapons or just be trained with new ones. How did that work for him?
On his weapons training?
Yes.
Well, he already knew, being in the Army earlier, before he transferred into the Air Corps, he had a lot of training on probably a lot of different weapons. And then when he went into the Air Force, I think in 1957 is when he started competition shooting, 45, 38, 22. So he knew a lot of these weapons already before he went to Vietnam. So he was already a master in a lot of these weapons before he went to Vietnam. And because I know before I went to Vietnam, when I went to Vietnam in 67, he trained me in the M16. I mean, I had training, of course, in basic training, but he supplemented that with a lot of things that he had learned.
Of course.
And took me out to the range and taught me a lot of things about the M16, but even before I went to Vietnam.
Yes. That's what a good parent would do, right? Prepare ahead of time. Now, did he have to receive any further special training?
No, as I say, he was going on his way when he arrived at Pleiku, and I believe that was in May of 66. He, spent some time there. Then he was going to temporary duty to Tan Son Nhut to further his training in the M16, because the Rockdale Armory sent some, I guess, representatives there to train. They're the ones who I think produced the M16, and they were going to train him in a lot of the new things that maybe they've either added to the M16, because they made some modifications to it. Because there were some problems earlier. I think some jamming problems and maybe a couple other little things. And they made some small modifications, I think, to the M16. So they were going to train Dad in that so that he could train his troops or a number of men with that. And that was why he was going to Tanzania, was for that training.
Right. And his first orders were to play coup, right?
Yes. He was stationed at Pleiku, which I believe is north of Saigon. I don't have the map with me, but all those places, the places he was at, Phan Rang, Pleiku, Da Nang, were all north. Da Nang was really far north, but that was later on in some other tours that he did. But Pleiku, right, was his first. And I believe he was in charge, or he was the non-commissioned officer in charge of security. That's why you see NOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge.
Right.
That's what NOIC stands for. Okay. And I have that later in my notes here about what he did and when he was at these specific places. What was your question? I think I answered it.
Oh, was that the first place that his first orders?
Pleiku was his first. That was his first one. And the reason he ended up in Tanzania was temporary duty to receive the training on the M16 rifle from the Rockdale Armory. With
where he went to with Pleiku, did he share with you any of the names of the guys he served with, or at Tanzania?
He did. I don't have those in front of me, but a couple of the guys that were killed later on I have down here, and I think you mentioned their names as well. But there were some friends at various times that he served with that I knew. He mentioned his name. As a matter of fact, when I was in basic training and my dad came to visit me one day, one of his sergeants, his friends, was one that he served with in Vietnam, and he came with Dad.
Nice.
And I recall a visit from my father and that sergeant when I was in basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia.
That's cool. That's cool. And that's the amazing thing about your story in relationship to your dad's story, that you guys were able to see each other a few times before Vietnam, but also during Vietnam. That's just amazing. It's unique.
We crossed paths a few times. As a matter of fact, another quick story is that when you go to Vietnam, I flew from Fort Lewis, Washington to Yokota, Japan, and you kind of skip hop. You fly to Japan, then you fly on to Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam. And in the bathroom, I wrote in Yokota, Japan, Skip was here. And my dad, on I think his second tour, when he came through Yokota, Japan, he went to the bath. He said, "I saw your writing in there."
That's cool.
That Skip was here.
Oh, that's neat.
Was here. He saw that where I'd written that in there, and we laughed about that.
How unique is that? That's awesome.
I remember that. I didn't tell you that before, but I do remember that. Yeah, you flew from Fort Lewis, Washington, you go to Japan, then you go on into Cam Ranh Bay. And my dad, I think his second tour, he went, I think, from Fort Lewis to Yokota, Japan. And in the bathroom, I wrote, Skip Hiett was here. A lot of guys wrote on the wall, and they left it in there to show that they were there.
They were there. Oh, yeah. I like that. That's pretty cool. Now, we're going to get into this first major battle. There was 2 major battles that he was in during Vietnam, along with other battles during his time of service. But we're going to focus on the bigger one first. And that'll be the one during this interview that we talk about. And what was the name of this major battle?
Well, it was the attack on Tan Son Nhut Air Base.
When did this battle occur?
It occurred on December 4, 1966.
1966. And we had spoken before that the reason for him going there was to train officers. Can you tell us just about the beginning factor of when he was sent there, and then the time frame in which this battle occurred?
All right. He was in December 1966, December, I think it was either 3 or 4, when he arrived at Tan Son Nhut. He was there for a class on the M16 rifle from Rockdale. It's Rock Island Research Group. Okay. Rock Island Research Group. he was the NCOIC, the non-commissioned officer in charge of the air police training at Pleiku Air Base. And he was establishing an in-country air police training program is what he was trying to do. He had 263 air policemen and 133 air police augmenters. That's just additional people. And he trained them, he's going to train them in the M16, the 38 pistol, the M60 machine gun, the M79 grenade launcher, 12 gauge shotgun,
Wow.
50 caliber machine gun, and the M26 grenade. Those are the
Wow.
things that my dad, those were the weapons that he was proficient in, that he was going to train all those men in. I think the Air Force at that time was really looking for instructors, and that's one reason I think my dad was picked up very quickly and sent there. They needed men like my dad to train these young soldiers, or these young men that were coming to Vietnam, in these weapons. They needed additional training.
Right. So there was about 400 soldiers there.
Correct.
And did he ever share with you what the training was like for them?
He didn't, but I know that having gone out to the range with him, even not only before I went to Vietnam, but when I went to visit my dad when he was at Van Rang, we went out to the range, and he was teaching men about the 38 in the M16 and the M79 grenade launcher. And he would have other instructors with him, of course, to help him, but they divided the men up into groups and would show them how to use these weapons. So he didn't really share, but I kind of firsthand saw, and I do have a lot of pictures of him at these at the range and training these men, throwing their grenades, shooting the M60 machine guns, shooting their M16s, and him shooting his 38.
Yes, we have plenty of pictures of that. And that itself tells a story about just being able to see the visual of him training them, of what their daily detail was for them.
Right. He was more concerned with the canine units. These are guys that had dogs, sentry dogs. There was no training program for them. So he took them and the canines out to the range and had them fire their weapons. And he mentions in this that the dogs had a numerous reactions. Some barked, some grabbed the gun, some cowered, some ran away, some defecated. So they were not prepared at all. So he established a canine training program, and he established a modification to the M16 so that the canine handlers could handle their dogs and carry the M16 in maybe their right hand and be able to use it more proficiently. So he established that.
Well, and they needed to have that equal training. You know, you wouldn't send dogs in that didn't have any training. They would, just like you said, they would react in different ways and not be ready for it.
Well, not only that, true, but and the canine handlers being able to protect themselves, being able to have an M16 and being able to operate it with one hand while their other hand is holding the dog.
Right. And I'm glad that he thought about that, and he probably already experienced that. That's why he was ready for it, to be able to pass that knowledge on. And so that was really cool. Now, on December 4th at 1 a.m. in the morning, your dad woke up hearing gunshots on the airbase. He got up quickly and grabbed his rifle, 360 rounds of ammo, and a revolver before reporting to the Central Security Control Center. What did they have him do next?
Well, he was a team leader on it was called a quick reaction team. And that was a team of 15 air policemen who were sent to wherever the action was. And they were assigned a deuce and a half. That's a big truck. And so they went out to the air base in the southwest perimeter, and which is west of the hangars and flight line. where the VC were attacking. So they were sent to where they were attacking, and that was their job. Let's say it was a quick reaction. Yeah, the quick reaction team of 15 men. And their job was to, as I say, go to the hot spot where the VC were attacking and engage the VC.
Mm-hmm. And they had left so quickly that your dad said he didn't have a chance to get the names of the 15 other soldiers that were with him. But they, like you said, they arrived within 15 minutes to the location they had to go to and could hear shots off in the distance. And each one of his team members had their rifle on hand. Do you recall the type of rifles they used? You mentioned some of them.
Right. The only thing they had, Kathy, was their M16s, and my dad had his .38 revolver. And that was it. So all 15 men that had reacted to this in this quick reaction service, all they had were M16s, and my dad had a .38. And later, good. At the end of this, my dad will address that. They were vastly, vastly underarmed.
Wow.
They were overmatched by the VC as far as their firepower.
That was so scary. That had to have been so scary for them. Not just in the ammunition, but also in the manpower. Like you said, the ability to have more soldiers. They didn't, and they couldn't have known going into it, honestly. They had no clue.
Didn't. Yeah, and not only that, they didn't have any communication devices.
Yeah.
So here they were hanging in the wind out there with just M16 rifles, my dad's .38, and no communication devices whatsoever.
Wow, that had been scary.
That was a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah, that definitely was a good lesson to learn. Now, just like at your base, they had elephant grass throughout the base. Could you describe to us what this is in this interview? And if you think this helped your dad's unit or hindered them in their fight with the VC?
I think it helped them. Elephant grass would kind of grow up waist high. We had it around when I was at Long Bend. We used to have to, as a matter of fact, we used Agent Orange to kill it. And that's what got in our food and our water. But we used Agent Orange to kill the elephant grass, or we tried to get a bush hog out to cut it down. And sometimes we even used just diesel fuel to burn it because it was very high. It was very easy for the VC to hide in where you couldn't see them. And sometimes I think it hindered their vision as well. If they're hunkered down in the elephant grass, they really couldn't see that far beyond them.
Right.
And when my dad got there, like I said, the elephant grass was so high, you really couldn't see in front of you. And my dad estimated afterwards that there were like 90 to 100 VC within just 15 to 17 yards of them.
Yeah.
And they couldn't see them because they were in that elephant grass.
In the elephant grass. Wow. Now, your dad was in a position where he was able to take his fatigue jacket off and turn it inside out. One of the air police officers asked him why he was doing that. What did your dad tell him why he did that?
Well, he was turning his jacket or his shirt inside out, so because the stripes could be seen by the VC. Back in 1966, when I went to Vietnam, everything was green and black. All of our insignias and all that were in black. They weren't in white or gold to where you could see it. This is early in Vietnam, and before they had changed that. So my dad was turning it inside out so that the VC couldn't see his stripes on his shirt or his name tag, which was white. When I went to Vietnam, it was black. You couldn't see it. It was black on green. The Army learned, I guess, a hard lesson from that. Before that happened, so my dad said he was turning it inside out so that so they couldn't see that.
Now, I remember looking back at some, as you're talking and sharing this, I remember seeing the different pictures, that some of them early on were white and some of them were darker later. And that makes sense too. I'm glad that they thought about that little intricate detail to the uniforms. When
I went to Vietnam, everything was green. Our underwear was green, the t-shirts were green, all of our clothes were green, the writing was black, because you can imagine if a GI comes outside wearing white undershorts and a white t-shirt, you can see that for miles.
Yeah, you can.
So you learned a hard lesson from that.
Yes.
And so, you know, that was just something that he thought of, that I'm glad he thought of at the time, that, geez, you know, I'm able to be seen here. And he turns his jacket inside out.
I just think that's amazing, because in that moment, as things are about to get really heavy and the artillery's going, he thought in an instant and took the moment, stopped. Your dad was very detailed oriented. He was very thought about the little things. He was able to keep his mindset in the midst of adversity.
Right. And the minute he did that, or after he turned his shirt inside out, a 60 millimeter mortar round exploded about 100, he says 100 yards east of him. And then more rounds came from the north and south, and an RPG-2 rocket hit the truck. And then they started firing with their AK-47s, which are like machine guns, and they had hand grenades that they threw. So they were just outmatched
Yes.
gun-wise or weapon-wise, because all they had was their M16s, and my dad had his 38, and that was it.
That was it. Yes. And the VC continued to fire all around your dad, and one of his comrades him and one of the comrades were hiding under the bunkers while they returned fire on the VCs. You know, in this moment, though, when those 15 soldiers were with him initially before the attack of the mortars, how many were still able to fight after that attack? How many did they lose to that first round of fire?
They lost 11 men out of the 15, and of that 11, 2 were killed and 9 were wounded, and the only ones healthy that were left to fight were 4 men, my dad being one of them. And my dad was hiding behind a little knoll, and each man that was on each side of him was killed. And what my dad did to make them think that there were more there is he rolled back and forth, firing their weapons and then his weapon. He would roll over and fire one, roll over, to make them think that there were more there than just him.
Yes. And during that time when he was doing that, what was it he was reciting? Because he was reciting something during that time. What was it that he was reciting?
He was reciting, he told me that all the time he was doing that, he was reciting Psalms 23 of the Bible, which is the Lord of my shepherd, and about walking through the shadow of death, that he would not fear. But he recited that over and over, he said. And my dad, fortunately, was not touched. He did not receive a wound at all. And here 11 of his men were wounded and 2 were killed.
Right.
But he didn't receive any type of wound.
Right away. They were down from 15 down to just 4. And with the other men alongside of them, were any of the other 3 injured?
I don't believe they were, Kathy. It doesn't say, but I don't think that they were.
That's
I think
good.
they were fortunate as well.
That's good. Shortly after that, it went silent and the VC stopped shooting for a moment. And in this time frame, when there was no gunfire, the 2 ambulances came to get the injured soldiers. And then the commander of the 377th AP, Major Fox, came to see how they were doing. And they were able to get the wounded back to base before gunfire started again. But before they left, what did some of the wounded soldiers do?
Well, what they did is the ambulance did come and pick up the wounded, and I guess the 2 dead men, and I guess the VC allowed them to come, saw that it was an ambulance, and pick up their dad and the wounded, and they left. And they left my dad and just the 3 other men there alone.
Yeah.
To hold it down. I guess they thought, since there was no return fire, maybe that they had left. That's what they thought, but apparently that they did not. And after the ambulance left, the VC started firing back again. Return fire.
That part of it, I was just surprised that, because when you initially told me that they just left. I mean, and I get that they wanted to get the wounded out of there, but they didn't have anybody else that they brought to help support them and back them up. But the wounded soldiers, before they left, you had said that they had just thrown all their artillery and ammunition at them so that they would have.
Correct. Yeah, they gave them their ammo. You're exactly right. I forgot that they did. They threw a lot of the ammo and stuff to my dad and the three others that were left there. They gave them their ammo so that they would have something, because Dad said they were getting low. So exactly. So when the ambulance left, the guys that they took away, they did throw them their ammo so that they had some extra ammo. And quite frankly, too, before that, before the ambulance came, a Jeep rolled up with two master sergeants inside. And they asked, and they were up on the road. And they asked my dad, well, where's the enemy? And he said, right in front of you, 15 yards. And both men quickly jumped out of the Jeep, rolled out of the Jeep. And when they did, the VC hit the Jeep with I think an RPG, and blew and shot it to pieces.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And they just went back to base, didn't they?
Yes, yes, yeah. They shot at the Jeep. And I got here my notes. The two men crawled north. So I guess they left, and then one left with the ambulance. And when the ambulance left, that's when the VC started firing back again.
That's just unbelievable. But again, in that time frame, the wounded soldiers had the thought and the mindset like your father. They were able to think under the circumstances that they were in, beyond the wounds that they had. They were able to think back to the needs of the four that were left, and throwing the ammunition and just thinking about it, because that could have drastically changed their situation if they hadn't done so.
Exactly. I mean, they too did not know that the pieces were still there. I think the thought was that since there was a lull in the fighting, that perhaps they had left, but they really hadn't.
You answered the part about the Jeep coming in with the master sergeant and rolling out of the Jeep just in time. I mean, that's just like something you see in the movies. that they see the oncoming, forces coming at them, and then all of a sudden they just scatter. Right. Now, the article said that one of the articles that I read said that two C-47s passed over with miniguns straddling the perimeter, causing the VC to scatter and come closer to where your dad was. What happened after that?
After that, I think they did have some. Look at the notes here. I think they had some reinforcements that came in. The BC returned. Okay, the article said that passed over them, and then they thought that the area was secure after those two C-47s had passed over and strafed the area. But then what happened next was that the VC returned and started firing back at them again.
Wow.
And so they continued to fire, I guess, and try to hold down the area.
Right. And your father said that they then formed a line and went through the tall grass once the Air Force arrived. And as they walked through the tall grass, they saw many VC dead on the ground. About 10 to 15 minutes later, the Air Police left. What did your dad say he thought was the reason why they left? And I think you answered a little bit of that earlier, that they thought maybe the battle was over.
Yeah, I think there was a hole in in an area where they were able to retreat, and they were able to pull, I think, some of their wounded and dead through that. And that when the reinforcements came, I think, with more firepower, that's when the VC took off. And then when they formed the line and went through the area, they found a lot of dead and wounded that the VC, I guess, weren't able to take out. Right. I'm trying to see how many guys. They had a pretty good bit of guys, 30 more, I believe, reinforcements came. Mm-hmm. And when they stood up and they went through the elephant grass, when they found some of the wounded and dead VC there.
Right.
But they had retreated.
Yes. And once the battle was done, they went back and investigated, and they found that they were where they had unloaded their equipment for the battle, and they found their entry and exit point and learned about how many soldiers they were fighting. So it was the 4 of them against about how many of the VC?
Well, there were about 90 to 100 VC that they calculated were there. And I see in my notes before the reinforcements came, some ARVNs came up and joined them in the battle. And they came up, I think, in probably a deuce and a half with some machine guns mounted on the deuce and a half. And my dad did not know how to shoot the 20 millimeter gun that was mounted on the truck, but he did know how to use. I think they had another machine gun underneath that. They had an A4, which my dad did know how to use, and my dad jumped up on the truck and started firing the A4. And while he was firing that A4, strafing the grass, 2 Vietnamese ARVNs, regular Vietnamese soldiers, were patting him on the back saying, "Number 1 GI, number 1 GI." And they were pointing in the grass for him where to shoot.
Where to shoot.
And
Which was helpful.
He strafed that whole area with that machine gun. He did not know how to use the 20 millimeter, but he knew how to use that A4 machine gun because he had learned how to shoot that in World War II.
That's really cool.
And then it jammed a couple of times, but he was able to unjam it. And then he said by this time he noticed the VC were taking out the wounded and dead back through the grass, but then coming back to fight some more. And then it was almost daylight when they received more help, and they got more help from the air police. And that's when it pretty much started, when they made a big line and started going through the grass. And
cool.
They found the dead and wounded.
That's cool that they were able to maintain, and the RVNs that came in, what a great help. And you said that there was like about how many that maybe came and helped him?
Well, the ARVNs, there were only 2 on the truck, I think, at the time. Or excuse me, there were a few more, but the 2 that jumped up on the truck with them, the other ARVNs ran away. They left their weapons and ran away, and there's probably a dozen or so of them. And the 2 that jumped up on the truck with Dad to help him when he was firing the A4, they showed him where to shoot, and they were the ones patting him on the back. And then as it was getting to be daylight, then more of the air police came. And it didn't really say how many, but I'm going to guess it's probably 30 or so that they came. I'd have to look in my notes here, what it says here, but they came and supported them. And that's when the VC kind of left. They probably saw them come. And it says here, 25 to 30 air police arrived.
Yeah, that sounds about right from the notes that I have as well. And even though you had said that the A4 jammed several times, he was able to eject the bad rounds and continue to use that weapon, which was amazing that he had that ability to continue on and do that. And it was amazing to think that they were able to maintain until they got the support that they needed.
That A4 was a 30 caliber machine gun. And he was talking to the VC. One could speak English. He said he didn't know how to operate the 20 millimeter. And he said, well, we have a A4, 30 caliber underneath. And he said he knew how to operate that. And that's when they pulled it up. And he started using that and firing in the area. And then he says after he did that for quite a while, it was getting almost daylight. And that's when the other air policemen came. And they strafed the area, went through the area, and found they captured, actually, I think 3 VC, but they found some dead and wounded.
Yeah, with that one, I had a question about that. And it in that time frame when they found the 3 VC, the other air police came at that point in time. Your dad was shooting from the side that he was getting the shots from still. And as he was doing so, 3 VC emerged. And what you were saying, that they were in a certain condition at that point in time. What did those VC look like? And what condition were they in?
Well, one had his foot nearly shot off, and the other 2 raised their hands. Yeah, three came out, 2 crawled out with their hands up, 1 crawled out with 1 hand up. He had his foot was almost shot off at the ankle, and only his skin held it on. I think when that happened, my dad told everyone to hold their fire, that they needed the prisoners. When they came in then, an Arvin soldier ran up and killed one of the prisoners with a pistol. He shot him in the head. My dad jumped between them and told the other air police to take charge of the 2 remaining prisoners and protect them. He said, then take them to safety immediately. He says they were the only VC prisoners taken in the fighting in the area were those 2. The one that nearly had his foot shot off. My dad later said that he was sent to a hospital and his leg was amputated.
Wow.
But he survived.
Well, and you know, your dad too, with the way he trained the soldiers, he trained them to show respect, you know, to the prisoners, and to maintain that human dignity, you know, humanity towards them.
Well, the way he thought is that the fighting for them was over. You know, it was done. And that they were prisoners now and they should be treated accordingly. My dad, he always had a great sense of fairness, even though, and in war too, and how prisoners should be treated, and they shouldn't be treated inhumanely. And later on in life, you know, when my father became a federal marshal, he did the same way with prisoners that he transported. Always treated them fairly and with dignity.
As it should be. And in the training manuals that you showed, also, they were trying to train everyone going into Vietnam to treat people in that humane kind of way. And I love to see that your dad, like, he interceded for that prisoner and tried to help these RVN to learn how to, you know, remain showing that humanitarian side in their spirit as well, you know, and I like that. Your dad was a great guy.